Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry, wait. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Excellent. So that was a great setup. So the short answer, or the short story here, is how do we scale a single business model that's based on linked prosperity to systemic change. And so that's the basic purpose of me, I think, going after Yosting. And so what you see up here is a framework for what's happening during our lifetimes, or maybe our lifetimes and our kids' lifetimes, which is the big idea here that I want to share with you is what you're going to hear throughout the entire night is we're at an inflection point in the evolution of capitalism. And so you can decide for yourself which one of those lovely men you might be in that evolution, and you might not be able to see these things, and apologies, it could have been women, but the typical Darwinian evolution usually shows men running there, so that's what the artist did. But you've got an evolution from colonial to industrial to shareholder to a new form of capitalism here called stakeholder capitalism. So that's what we're going to talk about. The biggest trend of our time is a global movement to use business as a force for good, as opposed to as a force to accumulate private wealth. And like any movement, it's coming from all different sides at the same time in not a particularly coordinated fashion. Whether it's conscious consumers, 60, 70 million Americans that say they care about more than price, quality, and delivery, but also about the company that stands behind the product. Whether it's millennial workers, which represent, within the next couple of years, 50% of the global workforce, and whose single distinguishing characteristic is they want to marry a paycheck with purpose. To what Yosting was saying before, if you want to attract the best talent, you better get on board with what these folks want. Responsible investors, almost $4 trillion, this is just in the US, assets under management, that are looking for more than just the highest return. They're looking to make money and make a difference with their money. And you've got an incredible and large growing number of sustainable businesses, led by folks practicing the Vermont way of doing business. Ben & Jerry's is one of them, but there are many others up here. And there's well over 100, close to a couple 100,000 of those just in the US, and many more around the world, some of whom you met here tonight. So there's a bunch of stuff going on that make up a marketplace. And so what you're seeing here is an inflection point in the evolution of capitalism. Let's call it roughly from the 20th century model to the 21st century model, where the 20th century operating system was we're here to maximize shareholder value. Punto, like full stop. What's happening in the 21st century, and our institutions are struggling to catch up with the evolved intentions of these kinds of entrepreneurs, which is they're not trying to maximize shareholder value. What they're trying to do is maximize shared value, or the value to all of their stakeholders. With this evolution comes an evolution of expectations on the part of us as workers and consumers or investors. The last 20, maybe you could call it 30 years, it was about, like the first iteration, not surprisingly, is I go buy a product, and I want that product to be different. And so whether it's organic or fair trade or other forms of little buttons that you put on products that are about that particular product. The next evolution of that differentiation is not about the product, but about the company. Because 3/4 of those 60, 70 million consumers say they care about the company that stands behind the product, because in an age of radical transparency, mobility, etc., folks know everything whether you want them to or not. And so it's one thing for you to tell them that you're in a LEED certified building. That doesn't tell them anything, not only about what the energy usage of the building is over time, which isn't a bad thing if you just wanted to focus on the building, but it tells you nothing about how the people inside are being treated, or what's being sold out the front or dumped out the back. So it's like necessary and nice, but it's not complete. And so we're moving to a more holistic understanding of what we care about, which is the enterprise. Because at the end of the day, you work for a company, not a product, and you invest in a company, not a product. So the cool thing is that modest innovation of looking at the whole company leads us to where we are now, which is in a few short years, there are now over 840 certified B corporations. The B stands for better. Better for their workers, better for their communities, better for their environment, and often better for their bottom line. And those companies span 60 some odd industries, almost 30 countries, and they have one unifying goal. A lot of those companies you'll recognize here. They're Vermont based. but there are also folks up there from Brazil and Kenya. There's even some partners here in the audience from one of the first, or the first B Corp in Mongolia. And there's other folks from smaller B Corps like Rhino Foods, and I'll tell you a little bit about a law firm that was one of the sponsors here a little bit later on. That's a quite important company. So the thing that unites all these companies is that they're all competing for a different, to achieve a different honor than being the most profitable or the biggest or the fastest growing company. They're happy to be all those things too, but they would view that as incomplete. And so what they're competing for is to be the best in the world at being the best for the world. That's how they're trying to redefine success in business and change the norms of what our culture seeks to use business for. At the end of the day, business capitalism is just a tool. And you can use a tool to build a house or hit somebody over the head. And so what these entrepreneurs are united in doing is using this tool for something constructive, which is how to create a durable and shared prosperity for all, not just a short, quick buck for themselves. So the cool thing is because all these B Corps are actually measured for their actual performance, we don't just sort of give away happy face stickers for folks that sign up and say, me too, I kind of like that link prosperity thing, sign me up. That these companies are actually measured. That's what a certification does. It's third-party verification to see whether they're walking the talk. And not just on one particular thing, like a product certification, but at the whole company. So their governance, their worker practices, their environmental practices, their community practices. So we got tons of data. And so what we find out is even among a bunch of other companies that are self-declared sustainable businesses, if you work at a B Corp, here's a few of the things you get to say. You're 63% more likely to have survived the last recession if you work for a B Corp than if you work for a traditional American small business. That's a pretty good thing, because sustainability starts with being alive. And so these B Corps are actually more resilient in a difficult economic environment. But not only are those jobs still around, but they're actually higher quality jobs. B Corps, if you work at a B Corp compared to another sustainable business, not just your average Joe's Bait and Tackle, but other people that sort of self-identify with sustainability, you're 45% more likely to get a bonus even if you're not part of the executive team. And you're 2.5 times more likely to get 20 hours a year off to go work and volunteer for the NGO of your choice. So it's treating you as a whole person, that you've got something more to give than just punching out the widgets or coming up with a new ad campaign more quickly or more creatively. 1 minute, I'm on. So in addition to higher quality jobs, which is really still about me, also if you come to work for these companies, your company is actually improving the quality of life in your community. You'll see a couple of those metrics up here about how those companies intentionally seek out suppliers from low-income communities, both here and abroad, or whether they're using renewable energy to be part of a small part of a much bigger systemic solution. One of the other things that these companies can do together that they can't do alone is be a very powerful political constituency for systemic change. So these companies have now passed laws in 20 US states. The most important link in that chain is right here in Vermont, and the most important person in that chain is Ken Merritt from Merritt, Merritt & Moulton, who was the first attorney to get on board and engage with his peers, with the Vermont bar, to pass this law that actually institutionalizes this kind of corporate behavior, to say these companies are now legally required, voluntarily, to consider the impact of their decisions on society, not just on their shareholders. That chain went from Vermont through 19 other states, and that law was passed in Delaware, which is the sort of the mother lode of corporate law in the U.S. And all the capital markets folks in the background. That's a big deal, because 2/3 of the Fortune 500 companies are in Delaware, almost every venture-backed company. So these companies are not only better for their workers, they're not only turning their customers into evangelists, but they're also creating the kind of systemic change that can move the needle. And so this is the last slide, which we talk about making an emotional connection. B Corp isn't necessarily by itself an emotional connection. I come out of the athletic footwear industry. There's a small company that some of you may have heard of called Nike that had a campaign called Just Do It. So the Just Do It for this millennial generation, the Just Do It for this community of B Corps, the Just Do It for this global movement of social entrepreneurs is to be the change. Not wait for government, not wait for big business, not wait for consumers to tell them it's okay or there's a business case for it, but just to create the opportunities that we can then, just to create the marketplace that we can take advantage of. And so there's 3 ways you can be the change. One is you can use the B Impact Assessment for your business, that's the measurement tool that we use to measure all this stuff. Free educational tool for any company. There's 15,000 businesses around the world that are using that. Have at it. It's a pretty darn useful tool. Second thing is you can integrate this kind of linked prosperity values into the legal DNA of your business, so that as you raise outside capital, plan succession, etc., that stuff is baked into your DNA, so it's not dependent upon you, the charismatic leader, or perhaps the very thoughtful, aligned early-stage investor. And you can register your company as a benefit corporation here in Vermont, in Delaware, or 20 other states, and soon in 50. And you can do that just like you register for an LLC. You don't have to talk to B Lab or anything. Or lastly, you can join Ben & Jerry's, or Merit, or Cabot Creamery, or King Arthur Flour, or Rhino Foods, or Seventh Generation, or any of those other 800 amazing businesses, and Sun Common. And you can join them and be recognized as a leader of this movement and become a certified B Corporation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So just to push back a little,
yeah.
So what you're doing, everyone says fantastic, but the problem with every change in terms of sustainability so far is that there are lots of good ideas, but none of them have scaled.
Right.
So even if you look at organic, you look at fair trade, very popular, but actually in terms of changing the market, they don't change the market. Right. So what makes you think, okay, it's great, you've had a good start.
Sure.
But the risk is actually that it just becomes another initiative that kicks off well, gets a lot of publicity, and then sort of slowly sort of plateaus and dies,
right.
or just reaches at that,
sure.
that limit. Why do you think this will be any different?
So the short answer is we don't know it'll be any different. That's the honest truth. Movements take time, and they have uncertain outcomes. And often the people that begin those movements aren't around long enough to see how they end. And so the kind of change that the B Corp community is interested in is generational change. And so one of the things that I find most inspiring about this community is they think like cathedral builders, not like hedge fund managers. And so it's unclear when you're building that cathedral whether the particular piece you're working on, how that fits into the whole, or whether you're going to be there to see the end of that beautiful creation for millions of others to enjoy for centuries. And so the short answer is we don't know if it'll be successful. What we do know is that we're laying the pipe and the infrastructure where we're not only helping to change norms by shining a light on these rock stars of the new economy that are both high impact companies and high growth companies, but we're also making sure that those companies can be built to last and that the sum is worth more than the whole is worth more than the sum of the parts. And so you've got nearly 1,000 businesses in just 5 or 6 years. You've changed laws in 20 states to make sure that this is an easy on-ramp for many more folks. And you've created a set of standards that anybody can use in quite an open source way to take either the first step on that journey, or if they've been down that path for a while, to take further steps. And so we don't know if it'll be successful. But one of the important things that we're doing here is we're working on things that are both about changing normative behavior and celebrating successes, creating real standards for people to follow, and legal institutions to make sure those things